Hello and welcome everyone to the first episode of the Fitness Athlete Podcast. We are excited to be doing these and we're glad that you are joining us for our first episode. I am Mitch Babcock and I'm joined here with Fredendall. We will be your co-host for this longer format discussion type podcast where we get to dive into and unpack very common fitness athlete related topics, things that we hear and speak on and teach to a lot. Alan and I are both doctors of physical therapy. We are both CrossFit Level 3 coaches, and we are both educators and instructors for the Institute of Clinical Excellence, where we help rehab professionals understand more about the fitness athlete, barbell needs, strength, conditioning, and how to work with these folks in the clinic. And we have both been doing those jobs for the last 10 years. So when we speak to these topics, it is coming from both a educational, scientific perspective, from what does the literature say and how do we educate clinicians on the up-to-date literature, but it's also coming from a real-world practical standpoint of working with actual athletes on the gym floor and treating actual real patients in the clinic. So we are excited to be doing this. And without further ado, today's brand new first episode, we are going to get into something semi-controversial in the rehab space. Maybe you've heard about it in the athlete space as well. And we are discussing the butt wink. So Alan, why don't you go ahead and discuss and describe for everyone listening and watching what the butt wink is?
So when we talk about the butt wink, we also call it lumbar reversal. And what we're talking about when we describe that phenomenon is when someone is lifting, typically we see this happen in the bottom of a squat. We are watching someone's lumbar spine shift position to a degree that is observable with the naked eye. And so commonly that is a shift from a braced neutral spine position into lumbar flexion. But we would also call lumbar reversal if someone starts off in a braced extended spine and simply returns to neutral, or maybe even then passes into flexion as well. So some sort of degree of motion that you can watch happen. And then kind of why we're talking about this is it relevant to the exacerbation of current symptoms, or can it cause a new onset of low back pain in someone that is lifting weights?
And we hear it all the time too with people squatting is, oh, you don't want to hurt your back. And the butt wink is one of the common areas that people will point to on both sides of the argument of being a culprit of low back pain or being totally irrelevant and doesn't matter. And so just outlining why we're discussing this today, there is a real split in the rehab space around whether it matters or not, right? Does flexion of the spine under loaded conditions matter? To the point where we even have a most recent research article from JOSPT literally titled "To Flex or Not to Flex." Like it is becoming such a discussion with both sides of the coin making really strong arguments, to the ultra conservative side saying any flexion of the spine is injurious and should be avoided, to the total opposite end of the continuum where flexion is not a problem and you should just embrace all forms of flexion however they occur. And we really want to take the time to comb through that evidence and also comb through our practical experience with that and saying like where does the rubber meet the road here? There has to be something in the middle where clinicians can stand firm and saying, this is when it matters. This is when it becomes problematic. And this is when it might not be problematic and when you should lean into more flexion, and trying to give you a really honest middle of the ground approach that is backed by also the literature and practical experience. So let's first start with the literature, Alan. And I think it's important that we start with the conservative information, the information that came out maybe a little bit further ago, talking about flexion is the enemy. And can you give us a little lay of the land from where this discussion started from a literature standpoint?
Yeah, so we really have two lines of research. We have a line of research in the mid-2010s by Asa and colleagues out of Scandinavia that were utilizing specifically the deadlift in the treatment of low back pain. And in that line of literature, they were not trying to address in their hypothesis whether the position of the spine or the change of the position in the spine was relevant to the development of those subjects' low back pain or its exacerbation. They were simply saying, what happens when someone deadlifts? What are their outcomes? What are some functional outcomes? What are some things we can test and observe? Are there any things we can look at that might tell us if somebody is ready to begin deadlifting or to return to deadlifting? And then also comparing that to what we might have considered at that time, 10 to 15 years ago, traditional rehab for low back pain, which we might call spinal stability programs or motor control, where folks are really focused on maintaining a braced neutral spine and then doing some stuff, laying on a table and doing bent knee fallouts and knee tucks and that sort of stuff. And then comparing that to a group of subjects who went in the gym and deadlifted, where those folks were also told to maintain a brace neutral spine is just kind of a standardized protocol for how do we teach this group of 5 subjects how to deadlift, how do we have a trigger to know that we can allow them to progress with weight in the study. It's that they can lift that while maintaining a neutral spine. In that line of research, kind of finding a couple of things that we have, the Baron Sorensen test, where you're laying prone off a GHD machine or a treatment table and saying folks that can hold that for maybe 45 to 60 seconds without reproduction of their symptoms have the requisite, at least isometric strength to maintain a neutral spine and go in the gym and do deadlifts, and kind of giving us a test to use of should we have somebody deadlift in rehab or not. But then that line of research kind of, I don't want to say fizzled out, but it didn't go on to now say, well, what matters if someone lifts with a flex back or an extended back or a neutral back or anything like that. Fast forward to 2020, we have an article published in Journal of Orthopedic and Sport Physical Therapy, JOSPT, by Peter O'Sullivan and colleagues. That was a systematic review and meta-analysis of a couple of papers looking at lumbar motion with lifting. And I'll use air quotes. If you're listening audio only, I'm using air quotes for lifting. And that paper basically said there's low quality evidence to support that the position of the spine doesn't seem to matter for the development of new low back pain or any exacerbation of current low back pain. That kind of line of research then produced what we see a couple years later, which is now this mindset that it does not matter what your spine does while you lift, because this systematic review and meta-analysis says it has no impact. But we know if we go in and we actually look at the papers included in that systematic review, what you and I might define as lifting as coaches and even in rehab, and what those individual authors of those individual papers included in that analysis are not the same thing. Because when we look at what did those subjects do in all of the individual papers, no one ever lifted more than 20 to 30 repetitions, and no one lifted more than 12 kilograms, which is about 25 pounds. And so that definition of lifting does not look like my definition of lifting, whether I'm in the gym working with athletes who are focused on performance, setting new PRs, developing new skills. But it's also not very relevant to my patients who maybe are sedentary, because even though they're sedentary, it's unlikely that they are lifting at that low of a volume and that low of a load, that they're stopping themselves at 25 repetitions a day of 25 pounds. They're picking up dog food and kids and brick pavers and all sorts of stuff. And so that line of research doesn't really translate to real life at all, because those people were not doing what your everyday person and certainly your everyday active person is doing.
You know, and it's what's important there is understanding the role of how much load is used. So you mentioned 12 kilos, 24 pounds, 28 pounds. Relative to someone's 1 rep max potential. I think like in the literature, this is where we have to continue going, right? Like let's set the foundation for some of these low level movements, but let's continue to push the loading with some of the procedures that have been outlined already and see what continues to show up. Because what you're seeing in the gym is individuals really challenging close to and resetting a new 1 rep max. And I will use myself for an example. If my 1 rep max is a 600 pound deadlift and a 28 pound deadlift is 4% of my 1 rep max, it is really hard to get an estimation of what's happening from an injury standpoint with utilizing a 4% of 1 rep max load when I am constantly in the gym challenging 65, 70, 80% of a 1 rep max, 90%, and then resetting a new 1 rep max at 100% of 1 rep load. So, and this is where my frustration lies with a lot of the internet therapists, right? The internet gurus, the rehab pros that are very clearly not in the gym space, are too removed from that culture, right? And they don't see north of 50% of a 1 rep max almost ever. And I know this because their clinics don't have any weights that go heavier than 30 pounds. I know this because I teach to the clinicians who work with them who say, I have been begging to get a barbell and get plates and to be able to have something to load clinicians up. So I know that they're speaking to a world that exists in sub 50 pounds or down. And when you're in that world, you don't see a lot of individuals who are struggling with lumbar reversal in a squat causing issue, right? Like I can give someone a 35-pound kettlebell if that's the heaviest thing I've got, and they can butt wink and flex, or they can stay neutral and not flex, and neither one of them is going to be symptomatic with that movement pattern. So your lens is skewed to the ultra low load perspective. And if you have the perspective of a coach, of someone who's on the gym floor, who's someone who has worked with athletes for 10 years, who have really pushed strength north of 75% of a one rep max, as the research would tell us, we need to get individuals stronger. That's how we do it. When you talk to all of those coaches, they are very clear that they are trying to coach individuals out of a butt wink. And this is where we're trying to stand in the middle, is saying, when does it matter and when does it not matter? It's not trying to demonize flexion of the back. Alan and I would both agree that training into and out of flexion is a good idea. That life is going to get you in positions where you're going to butt wink, where you're going to flex your spine, that you should have some requisite amount of capacity to do that. It is our methodology, if you will, to get someone's back as strong as humanly possible, to the degree where when they are challenged by those loads, that they are significantly under their one rep max ability. And this, for me, is my framework for what I'm trying to do in the gym. What do you have anything that would go along with that, Alan, or am I just off my rocker on this?
No, and I think if we unpack those papers a little bit further and recognize that some of those subjects were bending over and picking up like office items, like pens and staplers and stuff. And again, that doesn't translate to the gym, because what is not said in those papers is, to your point, how strong those people are, what percentage of their maximal tissue capacity is a pen or a stapler or a 12 kilogram kettlebell, but also saying that people hang out in flexion when they lift. Well, maybe when they bend over and pick up a pen or a pencil, but we know mechanics change as weight goes up. Mechanics also change under fatigue. So we're not just talking about maximal loads, we're talking about a conditioning workout where you might have 10 rounds of some jump rope and 10 deadlifts. And early on, when you're fresh, you may not feel the need to brace as hard because the weight is light and it's early on in the workout. But round 7, round 8, you're breathing really heavy. You might focus a lot more on that brace and your mechanics may change over time. And we don't see that happen when we look at research. And I recognize we have to standardize research, but when we standardize it to the point that everyone is picking up the same thing, they're picking up the same weight, that's not controlled for how strong that person is, how fatigued that person is, how frequently they train, we don't get data and a conclusion that can be transferred to real life patients and real life athletes who are doing that stuff every single day.
Yeah. And what I see, right, spending a majority of my time on the coaching floor and spending the other amount of my time in the clinic working with folks in pain, trying to get out of pain, is the flexion intolerant low back pain as a cause of excessive lumbar motion with squatting or deadlift relating patterns. And if we're just going to talk the butt wink, we'll just say squatting. When I put a bar on my back and I add axial compressive load to my spine, and then my spine moves from some state of relative lordosis, however much that is, to some amount of relative flexion, however much that is, and we can argue the nuance there of, scientifically speaking, you can't control for segmental flexion. It's going to happen regardless. We could also argue the fact that you shouldn't be able to see that amount of flexion with the naked eye. From an observer standpoint, once we start to view the spine literally changing shape, going from the nice natural curvature of the lumbar spine into this butt tucked, butt wink position, we are in an excessive motion pattern. And I don't need to I don't need to, in my head, describe it any further than that. I'm witnessing motion happen. I need to intervene because these are the people that wind up on my treatment table with flexion induced low back pain. Hey, it really sucks right now when I bend over and try to tie my shoes. Like putting socks on is the worst part of my day right now. You're seeing both the gym side of it and you're seeing the clinical side of it. And when we can get someone to change their movement pattern to a degree where they can start to minimize and ultimately reduce to zero of excessive motions of that lumbar spine, suddenly they start to have less pain and suddenly they start to squat better. And then you extrapolate that to the highest levels of performers, which are your Olympic weightlifters and powerlifters, and suddenly you see the same patterns existing with your high performers. And you always say something, I'll let you jump in here with a trend that you have seen with all these world record holders. What is it?
Yeah, it's that if mechanics don't matter and that the position of our spine as we're lifting is irrelevant because we believe it has no effect on symptom creation, symptom exacerbation, or performance, then what's true is when we watch people go to break the deadlift world record, when we go to watch Hafthor Bjornsson deadlift 1,180 pounds or whatever he lifts, he doesn't do it as a Jefferson curl. And when we watch Olympic weightlifters clean and jerk 500 pounds and snatch 400 pounds in that receiving position as they catch that barbell, those backs are quite flat. And so to me, if only from a performance perspective, that tells me everything I need to know, that it matters for performance. And also to your point, watching athletes in the gym tell you that they felt their back round and that created symptoms or made symptoms worse. We're also now saying the evidence in front of our eyes is wrong, that we saw motion, they reported symptoms, and even advanced athletes are aware of, I felt my back round in the bottom of that squat, and now it's kind of stiff and achy, and I think I'm going to be done squatting for the day. And so tell those people that has no relevance. That's completely made up, and that's not a thing that matters. You're asking them to deny the evidence right in front of their face, which is, okay, but I felt it and now I have pain. So those two things definitely seem connected. And when I don't do that, I don't feel pain. And so if only anecdotally, with watching hundreds of people performing thousands of reps on a day where we have heavy squats or something like that, it does indeed seem to be quite relevant, at least to that individual person.
Yeah, it's only relevant when it's relevant. It only matters when it matters. And it happens to matter a lot with the people we work with under barbells. And it happens to matter apparently not at all for the people that are conveniently not working with barbells at all. And so I just have to point this trend out of saying, like, even to those movement optimists, and I respect where they're coming from. They want to promote, movement on all kinds is all great. Yes, but once we start adding external load, positions do matter. And why are we adding external load? Well, I'm trying to build a stronger body. I'm trying to build a frame that's as strong and robust as possible. So resetting my current 1 rep max potential, another 100 pounds, means that I have quite a bit of buffer for everything that's going to occur sub-maximally, which gives me the movement optimism that I want. It gives me the movement flexibility to be able to help my buddy move a couch. The couch no longer weighs my 1 rep max. I can move in a lot of positions because I have spent time in the gym working in good positions, working with very heavy loads, so that I can go help you move your couch out of your basement, so that I can bend over and pick up this heavy safe and lug it up the stairs. Like, I want that flexibility and that freedom. So the positions in the gym matter because I'm getting under peak loads. I'm getting under 70 and 80 and 100%. And even when I ask those movement gurus and I say, okay, I hear what you're saying. You're looking at paper after paper and, flexion doesn't seem to matter. And I say, okay, let me put you under a 500-pound barbell. Let's get you under a 500-pound bar to squat it. Are you going to flex away? Are you going to tuck your butt and butt wink like you say doesn't matter? And they're all going to tell me the same thing. No, I'm going to brace and I'm going to try to stay neutral. And that's because they understand that when the spine is under these high amounts of compressive axial loads, positions do matter. We're trying to minimize butt wink as much as humanly possible. We have a number of ways to do that, and we can unpack them as these episodes go along. But this episode is namely to try to reframe this conversation in a lens of like, hey, when does it matter and when doesn't it matter? And let me play to the other side of that coin. When doesn't it matter? There is a workout that comes every Memorial Day. It's Murph. Athletes will do 300 air squats during Murph. I don't get too worked up about athletes butt winking during Murph. Now, you could say it's high volume and it's going to tax the low back, and I would agree with you, but it's body weight conditions. It's under metabolic duress. Their positions have a lot more flexibility to them because they're just squatting body weight. They're just doing air squats, right? There's a lot more freedom and flexibility to move your spine in a varying degrees of positions that I'm not running around as the butt wink police on Murph Day saying, hey, keep your back flat. Don't. Yes, a good coach can always be correcting positions and working on better patterns. But to my point that I'm making here, the level of concern or threat for that movement pattern on that particular workout is significantly lower compared to, hey guys, today is 1 rep max back squat day. Let's breathe, let's brace, let's keep our chest up, right? Let's work on keeping the lumbar spine as flat as we can. Let's work on improving our ankle mobility and our squat stance and making all these alterations to my squat to keep the spine as flat as possible to show me the best squat I can with the highest level of performance.
And I think, too, not to go on a tangent, but redefining what it means to be a movement optimist. It doesn't mean that we don't have standards for competition and points of performance to instruct people who have never done something before. Like, I can't imagine trying to instruct somebody in a full snatch that has never picked up a barbell before and to say it doesn't matter what you do. All human movement is good movement. I think that's a really dog shit way to look at movement optimism. I am the biggest movement optimist in the world. Like you said, we're not the low back police, but I think coming at it, and to your point of this really only happens when you are working to either get people more active or working with people who are already more active, of movement optimism is not standing at the whiteboard and saying, we're maxing out our back squats or our deadlifts today. Do not let your back round or you're going to end up in the hospital. Like, that's not how we approach it. We're not scaring people away from movement. We are coming at it from an instructive point of view of like, let's just take a moment as we're warming up and doing some empty bar or some light lifts as we're progressing towards that max test of what does it actually mean to breathe and brace, and taking the class through how does a belt help augment your brace. And so coming at it of like, these are the ways that you can increase your performance versus we're not sitting there yelling at them, don't let your back round on this lift. The clock beeps for the next set. We're not yelling at people and trying to scare them. And when we flip our hat and we're on the rehab side of the equation, we're certainly not trying to sell people packages to get rid of their butt wink. It's just something we're working on. We're always chasing movement virtuosity to understand that as people become better movers, their top end performance increases. And why we care about that as healthcare providers is their capacity increases. And that, I think, is truly movement optimism, because now, like you're saying, now when you have a 600-pound deadlift, it doesn't really matter what you do outside of the gym that's not a 600-pound deadlift. Picking up your kids, working in the backyard, whatever, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't have to think about breathing and bracing. And I think that is truly movement optimism. Of we've gotten you to the point where your capacity is so high, you no longer have to go get your back brace because you're helping your buddy move your couch. You're like, sure, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Let me hop in the car. You go over there and you move the couch and it's no big deal. I think that is where movement optimism should take us, not this, there are no rules, do whatever you want in the gym, just make sure you go to the gym every day. I think that's a really lazy way. To me, that's the same as somebody saying, you're out of shape, just try walking. That's a really low entry. I think we can do a lot better than that.
I love that. Redefining movement optimism. It's like strength is movement optimism. And let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because this will be a whole nother episode. But like, when you really concern yourself with the longevity research, the two things that keep showing up again and again and again is strength and muscle mass. And if you really want movement optimism, if you really want longevity and health, then you will get stronger yesterday. And if you didn't start yesterday or 20 years ago, that's fine. The next best day to start is today. And to get stronger requires learning and developing the patterns and the skill set to be able to move and move well. Being in this space for over a decade, we have seen so many different variations of someone's squat on their first day. To assume that all are acceptable is crazy, right? But all those humans are accepted in the gym. We are not, like, make no misunderstanding. We are glad all of them are there. And there's entry points in scaling and regressions. And this is what makes a great coach and a great clinician, is saying, I can teach anyone to squat on day one. It might look very different, right? For my older adults learning to squat, it looks like me putting a box under their butt and giving them a nice safe landing point and teaching them just how to keep their knees tracking in line with their toes, giving them upper body assist. For my younger athletes, talking about, controlling their rapid drop to the bottom. Let's get some eccentric control out of this movement pattern, and probably advancing into load rather quickly, and everything that happens in between. It is not rejecting anyone's squat, but it is saying we do have a standard and everyone is working towards improving that standard, because when you do, we can increase your strength. And when we do, we open up a world of things that you can do with that strength from a movement optimism standpoint. I love that review. Well, Alan, that was a great discussion on butt wink. Do you have any final thoughts from a research perspective before we round this episode up?
Yeah, I think I'll just finish by saying, and I think I can speak for you here, we would love to see more research in this area. And we always hear questions as we teach of, why haven't more papers come out? Why don't we have any randomized control trials looking at maximal loading with a braced spine versus a flex spine? And what happens as we progress loads relative to max and under metabolic stress, under what somebody might experience after a long day of work or a long workout in the gym and things like that. And I think it's important to step back and recognize what we're asking is probably unethical to do to people, because at some point the question we're asking is there a point at a crossroads between heavy lifting and your maximum potential and the position of your spine? And at that moment, when you're at, everybody would love to see a paper that spinal flexion at 83% of your 1 rep max is where we really start to see the development of low back pain. Like, we would love to see that nail in the coffin type research, but we're also saying we're okay with setting those people who
Breaking some people.
who are likely coming into the research study asymptomatic and now leaving with low back pain, potentially a lifetime of low back pain, potentially getting addicted to opioids and having a terrible end to their life.
That study's never going to happen.
Yeah, that's not getting past the IRB. So if we can't see that kind of research because it's not ethical to conduct it on human beings, and it obviously is not something that can be done in an animal model type study, then we have to go with what we have, which is using the research that we know strengthening the posterior chain helps with low back pain. It also helps with other stuff like kinesiophobia and confidence. It obviously translates into getting stronger, stuff aside from just your low back pain. So we have a wonderful line of research on just getting the posterior chain stronger. So taking that and mixing it with our practical experience in the clinic, in the gym, working with people that, yes, for some people, when their spine rounds under compressive load, under a deadlift or a back squat or something like that, it does seem relevant to that person. And we can't, you started this episode talking about the split decision that's out there. I don't see it as a split decision. I see it as an and not or thing. It's combining the best research that we currently have and the practical application to real people who need instruction if they don't know what they're doing with lifting, but can also always use some more refinement to improve their performance and therefore improve their capacity. And it's putting all that stuff together, I think, that is the best evidence-based practice that we currently have.
I think that's a fantastic way to leave it. I think trying to add more to that summary is not needed. And I would just say that I've really enjoyed being able to unpack all this, and team, understand that if you're listening and watching, Alan and I are very excited to unpack a lot of different topics, ranging anywhere from barbell related movements to lifestyle related factors, living a healthy and long life. What did the research say on all the things that we encounter from a fitness athlete perspective? So we have numerous amount of topics queued up, and we're excited to be able to unpack these more for you guys in the coming weeks and months. So if you enjoyed this podcast, we would ask kindly that you maybe share it, give us a review, give it a thumbs up, and tag us. You can find us exclusively on the Fitness Athlete Instagram page, where we're posting nonstop fitness athlete related content. And you can find us at Ice Physio, teaching this content to rehab providers. So if you are a physical therapist, a chiropractor, a rehab pro of any sorts, and you want to learn from clinicians that are both in the gym, in the clinic, on the coaching floor, and underneath the barbell themselves, that's where we really try to blend all of this current level of evidence with our practical experience and deliver the most high quality Con Ed experience that you've ever received. And you can find all of that through the Institute of Clinical Excellence by going to ptonice.com and checking out when our online courses are coming up or when a live course is coming to you. So with that, Alan, thank you for your time. Viewers, thank you for listening. And we hope that you tune in for our next episode with more discussion. You guys have a great day.